Hey guys, welcome back to chapter 7. In this chapter, we're going to go over decimals, real numbers, and proportional reasoning. And my name is Sarah Vernig, and I hope that you guys enjoy my PowerPoint. Okay, so we're going to go over our 6 homework questions that we had. Our first one is, how do you convert these decimals to fractions in lowest terms, and how to find the prime factorization? Okay, so our first number is 0.225, and our second number is 0.036. So let's start with A. Okay, so what I did was first I write the decimal out into expanded form. So basically you're just breaking it down and expanding it out, just like it says. So because it's a fraction, you look at what place values you have. We have tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. So the 2 is in the tenths place. So we go 2 over 10. That's the same as saying 2 tenths. Plus 2 over 100, because the 2 is in the hundredths place. And 5 over 1,000, because that's our last place that the 5 is in. So when we add it all together, we get 225 over 1,000. Now our next step, we actually divide it, and we reduce it. When you reduce 225 over 1,000, you get 9 over 40. And a good way to do this is you can either look at it and you say, oh, well, it has a 5 and a 0 in the last place. Well, obviously, it's divisible by some number that ends in a 5, because 5 is divisible. You know, it can go into any number ending in a 5 or a 0. Okay, so here we go. We want to check our work. We want to make sure that 9 over 40 is the same as our fraction. So if we divide 9 by 40, and we get 0.225, and our greatest common divisor is 25, so that problem is done. Okay, on to B. B, we have 0.036. And again, I did the same thing. I wrote it out in expanded form. To me, it's just easier to see, and it's easier to get that fraction to reduce it. So we have 0 tenths, or tenths. So I put a 0 over 10. I like to see it so that way I don't think that I'm forgetting a step, or that I just get in a habit of writing it down, and then one time I have a number in the 10 spot, and then I'll just forget it. So I put a 0 over 10. It doesn't mess anything up. It doesn't hurt anything to put it as that. It's just it's kind of a reminder for me that I don't have anything there. Okay, so then we continue. We have 3 in the hundredths and 6 in the thousandths. We add them together, we get 36 over 1,000. Now you look for the greatest common divisor that could divide both of these to get our lowest term, and that would be a 4. So 4 divided by 36 gives us 9, and 1,000 divided by 4 is 250. So we want to check it, and again, it checks out. If we do 9 divided by 250 on our calculator, we get 0.036. Our greatest common divisor is 4. I also learned this fun fact doing this, that there is a button on your calculator that you can use. Mine's under the math. I think it's math and then numbers. And then towards the bottom, I think it's 8 or 9, there's a button for greatest common divisors and least common divisors. So even if you didn't know how to do this, you could put that in there, or you could use it to check your work. And then you could check to make sure that the calculator is correct and that you're correct. That's what I did. I found it after I had already worked this out. I stumbled upon it, so I went back and checked. And then I just did a few numbers for fun just to see if it actually worked, and it does. So that's a pretty cool function that I thought I would share, and I'm definitely going to be using that in the future. All right, so let's go to number 2. So we're going to suppose that the variables x and y are related by each of the formulas shown below. Create a graph for each formula. All right, so on A, we have y equals x over 2. So what we can do is we can make a chart, and you just put your x and y. So x can literally be any number that you want, and you put that number in for x. So if we do 4 divided by 2, it gives us 2. So we'd have 4 and 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so that would be our y equals 1. Negative 2 divided by 2 gives us negative 1. So we would graph that too. Okay, and on to the second one where y equals negative x over 2. And again, the same thing, we just plug in any numbers that we want for x that we want to try to find, and then that would be our y. So obviously 0 is going to be 0. Negative 2 and 1, negative 1 and negative 1, and I have 0 and 0 again. So you could just put any number in there, and it would work. All right, and our next one, y equals 10x. And again, it's kind of the same thing. You can put any number in for x, and it'll give you your y. And then you can use that to graph it. And as you can see over here on the right side, we have some graphs that are done for you so you can see that. So if we put in a 1, so 10 times 1 will give us 10. If we put in 2, it gives us 20, 3 gives us 30, and so on. This one's kind of easy because it's just 10 is all you're multiplying it by. All right, our next one, y equals x squared. All right, so what we do for this one, again, we just put any number in for x, and we're going to square it. 2 squared is 4, so we put 4 as y. And that's going to, when we put a value in for x, that's what's going to give us what our y term is. So negative 1 is 1, 0 is 0, 1 is 1, and 2 is 4. And then I just graphed it again, and you can see the graph. And just always, you can double check it. So the opposite of multiplication is division, and you could always check your work that way. Or you could always put it in a calculator, and it would graph it. Okay. Number 3, we are moving right along. What are the percentages and fractions of each red portion of these figures? All right, so we have 2 squares in a circle. All right, so we're going to start with our first square. So as you can see already, the square, if you look at the black lines, it was broken down into 4 equal parts. But you can see here we only have half of one of those shaded in. We can say that we ate half of that part, we used half of that part, just know that it's taken. So when we write our fractions, you think of it as the numerator over the denominator. And an easy way to remember the denominator is denominator down. So the numerator is the parts that are taken. The denominator is parts of the whole. So right now we would have 4 as a denominator. But that's not really going to work out very well for us because we only have half of one of those that are used. So what I did is I went ahead and split it again. Because these are equal pieces, we can just draw lines. So the yellow lines are where we halved it again to get a numerator of 8. So you can count out the pieces if you want. So we would get 1/8 is what our fraction would be. Now that's just part of the question. So we want to find out how we find the percentage. So when you do it on your calculator, you do 1 divided by 8, you get 0.125. And that's going to help us because we can turn that into a fraction. You take 0.125, multiply it by 100, and you would get 12.5%. And that is your percentage of 1/8 of this figure. All right, so now we have our second square. And we can see originally that we have 9 squares. So out of our 9 squares, we can see we have 3 that are fully filled in that we have taken, and then we have half of 1 square. So because we have half, and don't mind my little shading, I got a little carried away, a little more than half. So what we do is I halved each block again. And when we halved it, we now have 18. So we have 18 squares, and then we can find out what our fraction is. So we're going to count each square. So we have 2, 4, 6, and then 1 gives us 7. So we would have 7/18 would be our fraction. Now we want to find what the percent is. So you would, again, on your calculator, enter 7 divided by 18, and that gives you 0.388888, and it just keeps on repeating. That's what the line over the 8s mean. It means that it repeats. So we can round. We round to 3 places, which would give us 0.389. And then we're going to take that and we're going to multiply it by 100 to give us our percent of this figure. And that's going to give us 38.9%. And that's going to be equal to 7/18, which is equal to how many we have shaded in this figure. All right, and our last one, this one's kind of easy. So we have a circle. It's in 2 different pieces. It doesn't matter really if it's drawn like this, or it can just be some kind of crazy shape, but as long as it's equally halved, that's all that really matters, because if those pieces are not equally halved, then we cannot make it into a fraction. So our fraction to here is 1/2, or 1/2, because we have 2 pieces, and we have used 1 piece out of the 2. When we enter it into the calculator, we're going to get 0.5. Whenever we multiply that by 100, we are going to get 50%. So we have 50% of this figure is being used, which is the same as 1/2, or 0.5. All right, number 4. The yellow hexagon represents the whole. How can you use a block pattern to determine the percent of the other shapes with percent of 16.67%, 19.2%, 33.3%, 38.5%, and 50%? All right, so let's start with our first one here. So what I did first is, you can see on the yellow hexagon, I just drew a line in half. So, and then I shaded it in because we're going to use that. So that tells us right here that the trapezoid, we can use 1/2 of the hexagon. To turn that into a fraction, you're going to take your 0.5 times it by 100 to get 50%. So we can mark that one out. We know that that trapezoid is 50%. All right, so let's continue. Now we're going to split the hexagon up into 6 pieces. That way we can find what our next one is. So we're going to take this triangle here, and we can see by comparing it to our hexagon that it is 1/6 of our shape. So to find the percent, you're going to divide 1 into 6 on your calculator, which gives you 0.166. And it just keeps on going and going and going. So we're going to round it to 1.67. We're going to multiply that by 100 to get our percent, which is going to be 16.7%. And as you can see, that is one of our options. So we're going to use that. And now we know that the triangle is 16.7% of the hexagon. All right, so now our next one is, we're going to look for the blue rhombus. And we can split this in 2 parts. 2 divided by 6 is 0.3333, and it keeps going forever. So again, we're going to round it to 3 spots. When we multiply it by 100, we're going to get 33.3%. So we have that one found. And I shaded in the 2 parts over there so you can kind of see it. Sometimes if you see it, it makes it a little easier. All right, so next we're going to do the square. The square is 38.5, and the tan rhombus is 19.2. We just follow the rules like we did on the other 3, and you can find the percents for them. All right, so this one, find the percent given A and B. What percent of B is A? So if Taylor has 4 bags of chips and he gives Hannah 2 bags, what percent of Taylor's chips were given to Hannah? So what we do first is, I just kind of made myself a little visual here. So we want to find out what percent of 4 bags of chips did he give to Hannah. So the way I think about this is, if you relate everything to either pizza or money or something like that, it's a little easier to figure it out. So we have 4 bags. We want to find out what 2 is. Well, this one's kind of easy because we know that 2 is half of 4. So we can figure that out that it would be 50%. Because if you have half of something, then that's the same thing as saying you have 50% of something. Okay, our next one, given a percent P and the whole B, what is A if it is P% of B? All right, so again, Taylor has 4 bags of chips. Hannah asked Taylor to give her 25% of his bags. How many bags of chips is Hannah asking for? And this might be something kids could use a trick, an older brother or maybe even a younger brother or sister. They might think, oh, I can ask this and I'll get more chips. So 25% of 4 bags. How do we find that? Well, I like to think of things if they're 25%, 50, 75 as quarters because there's 4 quarters in a dollar. We know that quarters are worth 25 cents. So 25 cents, 25%, it's kind of relatable. So we want 25% of 4 bags. We can say what is, if we have 4 quarters and I want 25 cents, how much of your dollar am I taking? Well, it would be 1 quarter. So we can see that 25% is only 1 bag of chips. So he's not really using or losing a whole lot. All right, and our next one, find the whole. Given a part A that is P% of the whole B, what is the whole B? Okay, so Taylor gave 75% of his bags of chips to Hannah. Hannah received 3 bags. How many bags of chips did Taylor start with? All right, so we have his 75%, right? And again, if we think about money, 3 quarters, same thing as 75 cents, 75%. Okay, and so we want to find out how many bags of chips did Taylor start with. So we can look at it as 4 because, again, if we think about money, we think 75 cents of a dollar, we would have same as 3 quarters. We want to find out how much we had to start with. If we had $1 and we gave away 75 cents, well, what we start with, it would be 25% or 1 quarter. All right, and that is all of my presentation. So if you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to ask, and I will see you guys next time.